Hello, everyone. My name is Todd Allen. Firstly, thank you for coming to our presentation. Along with Dr. Kris Ramonda, we'll be discussing our ongoing research, and today's talk is titled Study Abroad During a Pandemic, Problems and Solutions. Before we do, however, we wish to thank JALT for the opportunity to present our research. This study was supported by a grants in aid for early career scientists. And if you wish to get in contact with either Dr. Ramonda or myself, please use the QR code to access our contact information, as well as the references used in this presentation. In terms of today's presentation, I will be discussing the literature that has informed this research, specifically looking at defining study abroad and the benefits and challenges of study abroad experiences. I will then hand things over to Dr. Kris Ramonda, and he will discuss the study, answer the research questions, and conclude the presentation. So study abroad refers to a temporary, pre-scheduled educational stay in a country where the target language is spoken among community members. As we know, there are different forms of study abroad programs around the world, which involve special courses, integrated university study, reciprocal exchange, faculty-led short-term programs, and of course, long-term and short-term programs as well. However, the study abroad program in the current study is one that is fully coordinated and integrated into the home university's curriculum. Now, previous researchers have investigated the various benefits, such as language and intercultural communication development, the challenges, such as culture shock or cultural adaptation, as well as the general experiences of study abroad students. And what they've found is that some of the benefits include improvements to language skills. Students are able to experience different styles of teaching. They're able to expand their social networks. They can learn new cultures and perspectives. They can develop confidence in other interpersonal skills, and of course, gain experience in another cultural context. However, some of these challenges include feeling like an outsider, having difficulties with language and cultural barriers, experiencing homesickness and a loss of the usual support networks around them. They feel lonely, anxious, and sometimes depressed. They have a sense of a fear of missing out. And of course, they experience culture shock on many different levels. Now, previous studies have noted that students report both positive and negative experiences during their study abroad. While some students report difficulties with adjusting to a new cultural and linguistic context, students also note that these experiences are life-changing in many ways. Many of these experiences remain with the sojourner for many years after their study abroad has ended. In other words, study abroad has a deep impact on a sojourner's life experience. Students have also reported that they grow and mature through their experiences. While students develop tangible skills through academic study, it is through the socializing in the local context that they develop more advanced intercultural communicative competence and learn more about themselves. However, currently we are in the middle of a pandemic which has had a significant impact on study abroad. And so while previous studies refer to typical study abroad programs, i.e. pre-pandemic, currently we are faced with a once-in-a-lifetime health crisis. Previous research has shown how study abroad students have experienced crises-like situations, such as the Tohoku earthquake in 2011. What scholars do agree on, though, is that pre-study abroad preparation is vital for these situations. However, COVID-19 was a very unexpected pandemic, and it has been, we've not been able to plan for such a disastrous situation. However, scholars have noted that COVID-19 has reduced physical mobility, of course. People cannot travel. It's caused a loss in revenue for universities. And as a result, these programs have been cut or changed or reduced, which has led to a negative impact on internationalization. However, operators and university staff are now looking toward a new normal, of course, trying to live with COVID. But traditional popular destinations such as the UK, Australia, and the US are now being phased out as students look for closer, more local destinations. Okay, I'm just going to hand things over to Kris Ramonda. Thank you very much for listening to my part of the presentation. I look forward to seeing you when we can.
Thank you, Todd, for your part of the study. I'm going to continue now talking about some of the details of our study, and I'd like to start with our research questions. For our study, we wanted to investigate what the negative effects and positive effects were on our participants as a result of the pandemic during study abroad. Importantly, we're talking about their perceptions of these positive and negative effects. Of course, some of the negative effects are easy to anticipate, but we were also curious whether or not there were some unanticipated positive effects as well. Furthermore, we'd like to investigate what strategies students and participants adopted in order to make the most of their language learning and cultural experience abroad during the pandemic. We interviewed 9 undergraduate students at a foreign language majors at a Japanese university. 3 were males and 6 were females. And all these students were required to do 2 semesters abroad during their second year as part of their program. In order to give you a better idea about the context of their study abroad, all of the students in this faculty, language faculty, are required to do their first year in Japan, focusing on language skills. And this is to help them make the most of their second year when they actually go abroad. During their first year, they also choose a study abroad program in one of over a dozen different designated universities in over half a dozen different countries around the world. And all these programs are coordinated. In order to collect the data, we set up a semi-structured interview. Here by semi-structured, what we mean is there were a number of scripted questions that we asked all the participants, but we also had quite a bit of unscripted follow-up questions if the participants provided us with data that was interesting and for which we wanted to follow up on. And most of the qualitative data came from a lot of these follow-up questions. However, there were 3 questions that were written specifically to elicit data to help us uncover the answer to our research questions. These included, how often did you interact with American, Canadian, and so on people during your study abroad? How has COVID-19 affected your study abroad experience in general? And finally, were there any unexpected positive aspects of your study abroad as a result of COVID-19? We used in vivo to collect the data. In vivo is desirable for a number of reasons. It is much easier to code and uncover patterns using this software, and we coded them based on the following categories. For this study, we are concerned with how the participants' experience related to the COVID aspect of their study abroad. So this is the area from which the data was drawn. And I should mention, this is actually part of our larger study. But today we'll be focusing on how COVID has impacted the quality of their study abroad experience. Just to give you an idea of some of the common themes and words that came across in the interview elicited from the interview questions, we have produced a word cloud, which includes 30 of the most frequently stemmed words of 5 letters or greater from the transcripts. And we also eliminated words that were initiated by the interviewer, as well as function words and other proper nouns. Moving on to some of the negative effects or perceived negative effects of the pandemic on their third study abroad experience. We have some that were very unsurprising, such as limited travel. On the other hand, there were some interesting things we uncovered here too. For example, their interaction was limited in terms of the number of people they had interactions with, but it wasn't necessarily indicative of the quality or amount of interaction that they had, which we'll talk a little bit about more in a second. They perceived fewer opportunities for culture immersion. They also perceived that there were quite a few difficulties associated with the online learning and technology such as Zoom. They cited a lack of human connection when they were online in these learning contexts and a decreased motivation to learn. If we take now a look at some of the anecdotes, direct quotes from some of these transcripts, for example, feeling limited, we see some participants mentioning things like they can't go outside or they lose some opportunities to talk with people in their daily interactions, such as when they go out to the store or to the convenience store and so on. And while it was acknowledged that they could gain some cultural insights from interactions with their host family, they really wanted to be able to explore the culture of the host country more in order to get a deeper understanding of the culture. A number of students had some perceived some difficulties and negative effects of the online aspect of the learning and the technology. Importantly, one participant indicated that he felt it was difficult to connect with people online because oftentimes a lot of the other students may not have their cameras on. They might mute their voice, and if the teacher doesn't enforce any kind of policy where everyone needs to show their face, it can seem perhaps more distant to the students in the classroom. Also, there's the issue of breakout rooms on Zoom. For those unfamiliar, Zoom has a function where students can place, or the teacher can place students in virtual rooms, but the teacher can't see or hear what's going on in all these rooms at the same time, which can be difficult. And also, due to the nature of being in Zoom, it's more structured in who talks and when they talk. It can't be as free as it is in a face-to-face class, where you aren't limited by things like internet connection and delay when you speak and people talking more easily talking over each other when they're trying not to. So that was another negative aspect. In terms of some of the positive effects, and I think this is where some of the more interesting findings surface, because these were harder to anticipate and they might have some interesting implications for advising students on what to do if they have to continue studying abroad in a pandemic. Some of these are unsurprising. For example, students mentioned that they became more proficient using online software, which was expected. Some students, on the other hand, reported that they found it easier to communicate in class. In particular, there's one student who was quite shy, and we'll look at an example from that student in a second. I think one of the more important revelations from this study was the perception that participants felt closer to a smaller number of people, in particular their host family and roommates, precisely because they weren't allowed to be as mobile and go outside and travel as much. And therefore, they were kind of forced into a situation where they got to know and bond with their host family more than they would have otherwise. At least that's how they reported perceiving it. Also, students reported that they had more time to study, which is also not so surprising given they weren't allowed to do other things instead. So in particular, one participant reported that she was quite shy in face-to-face classes. And this is not surprising to many of you who teach in a Japanese context and know that silence is often a problem during plenary style lessons where the teacher's trying to elicit ideas from students. And this particular student commented that she felt much more comfortable interacting and speaking and asking questions in Zoom because the teacher could clearly hear her, unlike in class where she was maybe too shy to speak in a loud enough voice. So that was quite an interesting anecdote. It shows that it's not all doom and gloom, and there are some, in fact, positive aspects of using online learning tools as opposed to face-to-face learning. And importantly, almost every participant reported an increased deepening of relationships with those which they attributed to the lockdown. For example, one student said, thanks to COVID, I could talk a lot. My roommate, I can make a deep relationship with them. Another student said that she could feel that people's relationships after the lockdown was deepened. And another student also said he said he could feel the connection between people more as a result of the lockdown. In terms of strategies, we looked at the qualitative data and 3 patterns emerged. One strategy students used, and this is not so surprising, but they tried to basically just stay in a positive frame of mind, which of course some students will just do on their own, but and others probably won't. Another aspect of strategies employed by the participants was focusing more on intentional study. Obviously, since studying abroad is a huge investment of time and money, I think some of the students reported perceiving a pressure to make the most of their time, and if they weren't allowed to go outside and have fun and socialize and go places, then they would focus more time on studying English at home. And finally, and probably the most beneficial and unexpected result was that students would be able to spend more time interacting with their host family, and in some ways create bonds and relationships with people that they may continue throughout their lives. And so this could very well have the most long-lasting positive effect of the coronavirus on the participants in this study. In conclusion, the overall experience was challenging and on the whole, undeniably undesirable. However, there were certain unexpected positive aspects that enhanced the experience. It's very well possible that some types of students could thrive in such a learning environment. And for that reason, we would like to suggest for future studies, it would be interesting to look at how personality type might impact the degree to which students who otherwise would not seek out immersion in the culture do so just because they have more contact with a smaller number of people with whom they feel comfortable interacting, and also perhaps the effect of using an online format such as Zoom, in which students might be able to more freely ask questions and communicate with the teacher without having to feel embarrassed or shy or something like that. So that's our presentation. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you in the future.